Has the billion-dollar expansion of Mecca turned Hajj into an overpriced shopping trip that cost Muslims centuries of history? Hello, I'm Nathan King in for Anna Naidu, and you are watching The Heat. Hajj is a pillar of Islam, and every Muslim who can is required to make the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in their lives. As the custodians of the two holy mosques, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is tasked with ensuring millions can make the trip safely. CCTV's Adel Al-Mukhri is in Mecca and has more.
For a religion of 1.5 billion, there are always more people who want to perform the Hajj than Mecca can handle. The city hosts 20 million visitors annually, 3 million of them during the annual pilgrimage.
The Islamic religion is one of the most widespread religions in the world. The number of Muslims increases every year. We are hoping Mecca will be able to receive 4.7 million visitors during the Hajj in 3 years' time.
The kingdom's ambitious plan includes expanding the holy mosques, widening roads, and building trains and other transportation infrastructure. The first phase of this mega development is set to cost $120 billion.
For the state, the Hajj is a cost center, but for the private sector, it's a profit center. An average 2 million pilgrims contribute $17 billion to the housing sector, $200 million to transportation, and about $1.2 billion to the food and beverage sector. It's a season that has a huge impact on the city's economy.
The Holy Mosque has already been expanded from 300,000 to 1.5 million square meters. Its capacity has jumped from 600,000 worshippers to 2 million. But every year, more pilgrims keep coming. Adil Mahroui, CCTV, Mecca, Saudi Arabia.
To discuss why millions make the trip, we are joined from Jeddah by Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and general manager of Al Arab News Channel. From London, we are joined by Sami Fortune, an Islamic art, history and architecture specialist. And joining us via Skype from Toronto is Haroon Siddiqui. He's a journalist with the Toronto Star and recipient of the Order of Canada, the country's highest civilian honour. Viewers can also join the discussion by tweeting comments to CCTV_America, hashtag CCTV The Heat. Let's go straight to our panel, and let's start in Saudi Arabia and Jamal in Jeddah. Fill us in on the Hajj and its popularity. What was only 200,000 pilgrims in 1960 is now millions of people coming a year. Quite a spectacle.
Yes, the Hajj is the fifth pillar of Islam. Every Muslim who is able to must perform the Hajj. And being able means physically and financially. That's why out of the 1 billion Muslim, only about 2 million perform the Hajj. So there is still a big ratio here. But we should also take notice that this year, maybe because of the heat, the economic declining, the number of the Hajj dropped. It is the lowest in 18 years. I performed Hajj in 1982 myself, and there were 3 million Hajjs at that time. This year, about 1 million point 8 Hajjs who performed Hajj this year.
Jamal, that seems to be a blip, though, because it's been getting bigger and bigger every year, and also Mecca is being transformed to accommodate more and more people turning up for pilgrims for the Hajj, correct?
That's true. The kingdom is forecasting for the future, expecting that the Hajjs can go up to around the 3 million figure, or maybe more, and also the mini Hajj, which we call Umrah, is going to continue throughout the year. So now we have more accommodations, more hotels. The Grand Mosque has expanded dramatically. Now in a single hour, I think 100,000 Hajjis or Muslim can circumvent the Kaaba in one go. So Saudi Arabia is spending billions of dollars to accommodate and make it more comfortable for the Hajjis to come to Mecca and Medina and enjoy the Hajj.
Sami in London, obviously lots of construction underway. You can see on the pictures we have behind us here in the studio, quite incredible. I suppose there's a push to accommodate as many pilgrims as possible, but also rapid development, considering you preserve a lot of what you would describe as Islamic architecture. Where do you see this going?
Well, I think the expansion will continue. I mean, the priority religiously and for the state as well is to accommodate the pilgrims. I mean, even from the 50s when Abdulaziz did the first expansions, that was always in the mind. I think at the time the mosque could only accommodate about 48,000 people. And with a growing Muslim middle class, with flight transport, all of this is increasing the need for development. Unfortunately, a lot of historic sites have been lost through the development.
Like which ones?
But, yeah. Like the Ottoman era fortress, for example, where they now have the shopping center development. For example, the house of Khadija, where the Prophet received some revelations of the Quran. There's even the house where the Prophet was born, although that's sort of underneath a library, which you can still go and see. So, I mean, for the international community, that's a concern, especially as, and from a Muslim point of view, I think historic sites are very important because we need to be able to constantly understand the religion. We need to understand it's not just good enough to have the Quran and the Hadith. We have to have sources from which we can transport ourselves back to that time, as it were, and to understand the message of Islam. I mean, there was a program that came out last year, I think, with Tom Holland, which was very critical about the traditional Islamic narrative. And it was full of holes, his program. But, you know, one of the interesting questions that came up was, you know, where's the archaeological evidence to support our, you know, traditional narrative of Islamic history? And unfortunately, there's very little left. This isn't necessarily the, I would say it's an individual's fault, or a lot of people like to blame, they say it's the Wahhabi way to destroy things. I think it's a lack of desire on behalf of perhaps the state. I mean, if you look in the 1930s, Saudi was one of the poorest countries in the world. And when you have a lack of education, there is also normally a lack of appreciation and preservation for historic sites. The people who are in power making the decisions now are of the generation that had not very much education. You know, I've met sheikhs from very big tribes, and they're fantastically, you know, educated. They can recall poetry dating back thousands of years. But in terms of a formal education and exposure to the outside world, it was very, very limited.
Right.
So I think you have to understand the developments in that context. We can't just purely be critical from a European point of view. It's terribly, terribly sad what's happened. But we have to look at it in the light of the development of the state.
Thank you. Haroon Siddiqui in Toronto, a lot of criticism about potentially the commercialization of Mecca, but this has happened at religious sites all around the world. You think of the Vatican, you can't get through without souvenir shops, Bethlehem, for example, at Christmas. This seems to happen all over the world as the popularity of these religious sites and the accessibility increases.
You see, it's, Sami was saying that there is an international outlook and an international worry about this. The worry extends right to Saudi Arabia itself. The famous architect Sami Angawi, for example, whom I interviewed, 2005 or 2004, has been raising this concern for a very long time, saying about the commercialization and so on, and the bigger it gets, the more historic sites are lost. And it's a very great argument, and he himself has preserved. He was the guy who excavated the gravesite of Sheikha Khadija, for example, and preserved some of those architectural wonders, and he has incorporated into his own house in Jeddah beautiful carved old Meccan doors and windows. So that's the concern extends to Saudi Arabia also, one. Number two, what we have are 2 or 3 broad narratives that get wrapped into one thing. The most important thing is what is happening in Saudi Arabia, as you say, is exactly the same thing as is happening in Vatican. And this is a struggle between accommodating more and more people on the one side, and B, yes, advancing commercial interest, while on the other hand, preserving and preserving the old architecture. The same argument happens in every city, including mine. Why did we not declare it a historic museum? Why did we not save that site as heritage site? Right. So this argument takes on a greater significance when this happens in Saudi Arabia, because as you said about the exponential rise of the number of people who come there, that's one. Number two, no question, because of the greater commercial interest involved, because lots of billions of dollars are being spent and billions of dollars are being made by people.
Haroon, I'm glad you mentioned the commercial aspect of this. I want to put that to Jamal Khashoggi in Jeddah. I was amazed to see the percentage of GDP that the Hajj actually brings and Mecca brings to Saudi Arabia. 3% is the estimate of Saudi GDP, $16.5 billion and climbing. More pilgrims means big business, correct?
We need to enlarge that more, because if we take a rate on investment right now, we are not winning that much right now.
With lower oil prices,
it's better. The government has spent. It is not only for the oil prices, it is for the people of Mecca and the people of Medina who should benefit from the Hajj. But if we take it as a rate of investment, the trillions that the government has spent on Mecca and Medina do not make up for the revenue we are making right now. But it is not, there is nothing wrong with making revenue for the people of Mecca and Medina. And I agree, as a Muslim who lived in Medina all my youth, when I leave the Grand Mosque in Mecca or in Medina and I see a Starbucks or a Hilton Hotel, it does annoy me. But people like that. People go to Starbucks and they have their coffee after they perform their rituals. So there is nothing we could do about that. Maybe intellectually we might write an article asking for the preservation of the heritage, but look, we are in modern world, and Muslims coming from China or from America and from the rest of the Muslim world, and they want to enjoy what they are used to, and there is a business to it, and the people accept it.
I just want to say, you mentioned the people of Mecca and Medina benefit for them, but there has been some criticism that the informal economy that relied on the Hajj, people from Mecca and Medina who made money before, are losing out now to the big developers and the big hotel chains, and also the hundreds of thousands of people who choose to make Mecca their home, even though they're not Saudi citizens, because they want to be close as possible to the holy sites, are also being pushed out of the city. So it seems there is some push and pull with who this is actually benefiting.
But Nathan, that argument can be applied in any city. I mean, we are having this argument in Vancouver, in Canada, that foreign buyers and so on are buying up homes, and they are in effect emptying out the old neighborhood. So that argument plays internationally. So it's not exclusive to Mecca. What is really forgotten most often really is the following, is that Mecca and Medina have always been a commercial center with pilgrims coming and going, and this predates Islam and the historic times. So that argument is really irrelevant by and large. The real argument here is the following. How far do you go to preserve, or is there anything left to preserve, as Sami Angavi says? That's one aspect of it. The second aspect really is also that the legitimacy of the Saudi regime is drawn partially from maintaining Mecca and Medina and making it possible for millions more of Muslims to perform the Hajj in relative comfort. On that question, no doubt whatsoever that the Saudis have taken yeoman steps to make it easier and more possible for more Muslims to go there. So what do? There is this yin and yang between those arguments, you know?
Haroon Siddiqui and everyone else will pick it up just after the break, but it's a very interesting discussion. So should what's good for the soul be good for the wallet, and are the right measures being taken to preserve the heritage of Mecca? We continue our discussion about the development of that holy city. Tweet your comments and questions using hashtag CCTV The Heat, and stay with us. We'll be back. We're discussing the importance of the Hajj and how it's changed centuries after the first pilgrimage. Let's hear from our distinguished panel more. Let's go back to London and Sami Fortune. Behind you is the Palace of Westminster with Big Ben, the bell and the clock tower there. In Mecca, there's something, basically a copy of that, but even bigger, surrounded by hotels and growing and growing and growing. In fact, you can see it when you're going around the Kaaba. Is that development too much?
In my opinion, I do think it dwarfs the holy site, and I did go on Umrah before and after the construction of that building, and I did feel that it did dwarf it. I mean, I know in the past that residents nearby the Kaaba would construct their houses with a limited height out of respect for the surrounding building. But then I do understand Mr. Khashoggi's argument about the need to accommodate the pilgrims. And in terms of history in accommodating pilgrims, we can see that in the latest thing, which was the removal of the Ottoman and some of the Abbasid columns. And unfortunately, some of those weren't taken apart so well. Some of them fell to bits. A Turkish team were involved in trying to reconstruct some of that at a site near Arafah. One of them was telling me that despite CAD, despite all the advanced technology, they were struggling to put back some of these what would seem very simple arches. This was a structure that was constructed by Sinan at its latest phase, one of the architectural geniuses of the Islamic world. And the domes were so technologically advanced that they aided convection currents. They helped cool down pilgrims. And there is a worry that this technology, every time people think they're the most superior who've existed. And I think there's a big fear that we're losing something, or we're losing access to study something that had a profound effect on our culture, technology, and the way people lived. But that has to be balanced quite carefully with the need to expand for the pilgrims. I mean, there's a famous Islamic saying where the Prophet equates the life of one believer to way more than the structure of the Kaaba, or if it was destroyed, the life of somebody is worth way more than a structure. So I think all those have to be balanced. Sami Angawi, like the gentleman in Toronto said, he did have a plan to do what he called surgical development to allow this balance. But I think because of the context, yes, he did several decades ago, and unfortunately, I think he was overruled, I believe. And the sad thing is, I think because of the context of education and the drive and the need to modernize so fast, that the balance has been outweighed. And to be honest with you, the average person that I've met in Saudi, they care about improving the quality of life. They want jobs, they want education for their children, a decent house. These are the main concerns. And unfortunately, culture and history and the preservation of history in Saudi and in the peninsula is a luxury for the wealthy. For example, Abdulaziz Kaki has a fantastic museum in Medina about the history of the Masjid al-Nabawi. And he's done fantastic work. He's written a book. But I think sometimes there's a little bit of complacency that when I went to go and research some of the old buildings in Medina, it had already been done by Dr. Kaki, and it wasn't necessary for me to do much more. And one last example that I will share with you. Yes?
But Sami, this argument that you're making is very valid, but it is we need to sort out how is this different than this argument playing out in every major metropolis around the world. This is the same argument.
I think the important thing is that it's the holiest Islamic site. Yeah.
No, I know.
And this is where some of the early,
I think that's a valid point, isn't it, Haroon? That this is the centre of Islam. This is where hundreds of thousands and now millions of pilgrims go, and it reflects on the religion. Does everyone want to see a Starbucks?
So equally reflects on the religion that more Muslims are able to do the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It is not one of the 5 pillars of Islam that I go look for architectural wonders of the past and learn from something as much as I may want to, but a greater duty.
But the Quran says that you must always challenge and strive and question to get a deeper understanding of, and part of that is not only through text, it's through sources. I mean, example today, I've bought one of the earliest Islamic coins. We've got it, it's a Sasanian Arab Islamic coin, but it's one of the first coins that has written in it Bismillah. We now have a context, we have a way of understanding when things were written, how they were written. There's so much more angles you can get from material sources, not just coins, but archaeological sites, than you can from an oral tradition. There's nothing wrong with an oral tradition. Oral tradition has primacy in the Arabian Peninsula, but we have to understand that in order to get a deep understanding, especially in our challenging times, with the things that are going on, we have to look and study and at least try and record, if it has to be demolished and cannot be moved, at least try and record in detail with teams from various backgrounds to get a better understanding of the Prophet ﷺ's life and the early historical times in Islam. We can never stop trying to understand.
I mean, no question in the abstract, that is absolutely correct. But question is, it's a subjective thing. Where do you draw the line? Would you have drawn the line on Mecca where it was in 1950 or 1960 or 1980 or today or tomorrow? Or should we say what has happened, as sad as it is from an architectural and historical point of view, that no new development should take place? You know, I tell you a story. On one of the trips to Jeddah and Mecca and Medina, I interviewed the deputy minister who is in charge of the Hajj. So I asked him what Sami is mentioning. I said, you know, there was an Ottoman fort here, and it's gone. What do you have to say about that? And his answer was instructive. He said, I packed it in boxes and I put it away for those who wish to preserve it. And you know what? 3 million people come every year. Not one single person has asked me what happened to the fort. My duty here is to make sure that the Hajis are able to perform the Hajj, and they're able to do it in greater numbers if they wish to come. Already there's a quota around the world from every country. And I'm not justifying everything that they're doing. I'm simply saying this debate is not as one-sided as it is often made out to be. That's all I'm saying.
Haroon, this is
sure,
excellent.
And I think we have a similar understanding in that.
Sorry, fascinating discussion, but I do feel that we should bring in Jamal from Jeddah here. Would you like to weigh in on this debate? You are in Saudi Arabia.
Look, right now in Saudi Arabia, there is a very strong drive among Saudi architecture archaeologists who are interested in preserving the heritage. But we know we cannot do that. Right now, the Grand Mosque of Mecca incorporated the historical city of Mecca beyond the city of the Prophet itself. Beyond the city, the Grand Mosque in Medina incorporated even the Ottoman city of Medina that existed up to, let's say, 1950. My own home is now part of the mosque. So there is no way we can preserve those homes. And the other point, when the people come to Mecca and Medina, their focus, it is not an Ottoman castle, fortress. It is the Kaaba itself. As long as the Kaaba is there, they are happy. And they want to be close to the Grand Mosque, so hotels have to be built. But those Saudi archaeologists, like Dr. Abdulaziz Ka'ki, who was mentioned, they are trying their best to either rebuild those locations in models here and there around the cities, but people are not interested. I think we need to increase programs for people to see Medina and Mecca the way they used to be. But most of the people, they are already busy to perform a ritual which takes their time up to 5 or 6 days. So what is left for the past, they are more concerned with their presence.
Sure.
So it is. I would like to see more heritage, more buildings of the past preserved. But again, with the number of millions, I want to correct something about the Ottoman arches and columns that my colleague said that they were destroyed. No, they were not. They were destroyed, but then they were rebuilt again surrounding the Kaaba.
Yes.
If you take a look
and 70% of them are there. That was to enlarge the Tawaf area.
Jamal,
yes, sorry, I got distracted.
Jamal, I'd just like to move on for a second. A fascinating discussion, and we're learning so much. But in terms of the breakneck speed of the development of Mecca, there have been accidents. We've seen cranes falling. We've seen people die. In fact, that has led to some criticism outside the kingdom of how this has been handled. How would you respond to that?
Alhamdulillah, this Hajj was a successful Hajj. No single accident took place, and that's what we want to keep. But accidents do happen. The problem with the Hajj, it is the traffic of a huge number of Hajjs. It is like letting out 1 million people out of a stadium, and you want to make sure that everybody arrives his home safely. Every day throughout the Hajj for 3-4 days, the government has to maneuver 1,800,000 people out of their tent city to the Grand Mosque of Mecca, to the Kaaba, to the Jamarat areas, and bring them back to the tent safely. That's why we have to develop a plan for that.
Right.
That's why Saudi Arabia is very strong, very keen in stopping any diversions, any political activities, any reasons for people to argue with each other, because that will lead to a blockage, and a blockage will lead to a stampede.
Okay.
That's what happened last year, and that's why Saudi Arabia is very much insistent that when the Muslims arrive to Mecca, they leave their politics behind and just perform their Hajj and go for the rituals and ask for the mercy of God.
Jamal Khashoggi in Jeddah, thank you very much for joining us. Haroon Siddiqui in Toronto, also thank you. And Sammy Fortune from London as well. A very stimulating discussion on a subject. That's all we have time for. Thank you for joining us. We leave you with one last look at this year's Hajj. Thanks so much for being with us.